This video is a walkthrough of a 25 marker from Edexcel Paper 2 on quantitative easing. So we're going to talk basically about monetary policy for the duration of this video. My suggestion, as always, pause it, complete the video, complete an answer for yourself, and then come back and watch the rest of the video. So the question has this prompt that's based basically in the Eurozone debt crisis. The European Central Bank introduced a new round of quantitative easing in March 2020. Okay, so not the Euro debt crisis. Purchasing up to 750 billion euros worth of assets. The objective of this QE was to reduce the serious risks to the effectiveness of monetary policy resulting from a significant recession. The European Central Bank's target for inflation remains at below but close to 2%. Evaluate the effectiveness of quantitative easing during a significant recession. So, how does this as a question change when we're in the context of a significant recession? They do mention inflation in the prompt, but I would say inflation is much less of a concern with quantitative easing if you're in the middle of a serious recession compared to if you're in sort of a normal economic period, because your aggregate demand is probably producing an equilibrium that is significantly below your long and aggregate supply, meaning you're in a meaningful negative output gap. So inflation, certainly demand pull inflation, not as much of a risk as you might normally think from quantitative easing. I'd also say we're probably dealing with a situation where there's very high unemployment, generally going to be very low aggregate demand. That might be sort of a context that we want to talk about when we're evaluating the effectiveness of quantitative easing. My suggestion with this, because it's quite specifically focused on QE, right? This isn't just a general discussion about, government policies to get out of a recession. I would probably go pro for one topic and con for another. So sort of look at why quantitative easing might be effective, why it might work on as one of the topics, and then my other topic is going to be why it's not working. So it's kind of a natural evaluation built in there, but we're also going to look at probably evaluating some specific points as well. So QE is effective is sort of my topic one, and then QE is ineffective is my topic two. Probably I'm going to assume we've sort of already defined quantitative easing. I might be talking about definitions for things like the money supply. I might define stuff like aggregate demand, but I also want to make sure I'm throwing in some terms that are a bit more specific. So I might be interested in defining interest rates, stuff like that, marginal propensity to consume. And probably for a diagram, I am going to show that ASAD diagram with the aggregate demand shifting to the right. I'm going to want to show it as starting from a negative output gap. That's going to look like this if I use the classical model. I think there could be a shout for maybe doing a comparison between a classical model and a Keynesian model when you're talking about quantitative easing like this, because you might make the argument that increasing aggregate demand through quantitative easing makes more sense as a solution to a recession. If you buy a Keynesian view of economics, which is that there's not this hard upper limit on the kind of output you can achieve through increasing demand, instead long-run aggregate supply is this sort of exponential upward curve. So I might be tempted to throw that diagram in it as well if that's going to be a significant part of your analysis. That might be an interesting avenue that you could explore. And I'm probably going to reference that. The analysis here, why is this effective? Probably I'm going to want to first just explain how quantitative easing is going to stimulate economic growth. So I would say you're increasing the money supply, specifically increasing the cash on hand for banks. That leads to more lending, and then that's going to lead to lower interest rates, and then that's going to lead to more business, more consumer spending, let's say although it would also increase business spending, thus a shift in AD and a higher GDP output, like a higher national income Y. So, I mean, that's good analysis, but I also want to add context to this. Like, that's kind of the core main explanation for quantitative easing. I want to add to that probably some of the context of being in a serious recession. And maybe I might sort of think about the fact that a serious recession means a low, significant negative output gap. It also means probably high unemployment. And so we're starting from a low equilibrium Y. Okay, so that's kind of the analysis. We could add more stuff, but that's going to be the core of it. Maybe I'm thinking maybe as a potential evaluation, I could say, the classical model places a limit on the real growth that can be achieved through increases in AD. So that is the long-run aggregate supply by the, we could say perfectly elastic long-run aggregate supply, or you could just say the straight up and down LRAS. A Keynesian model, however, recognizes that there is no such hard limit. And QE, and so Keynesian economists may view it as more effective. Right, so this is just like, and I would write maybe a little bit more on the actual essay, but that might be one of the ways I would think about evaluating this specific point. And then I could introduce the Keynesian diagram as well, which would be like interesting. So that I think adds a lot of depth to the analysis. And also, like, you could put in a bunch of stuff for evaluation here that would explain it. Maybe like low marginal propensity to consume means that this wouldn't be an effective way of increasing aggregate demand, but that's probably going to be my second point, right? So like I'm sort of intentionally picking something here as an evaluation that's going to save a lot of stuff for the con when I move on to that, because I'm sort of structuring this as pro and con, which I don't always do with the 25 markers. But in this case, I'm sort of trying to save some of that ammo, so I'm doing something else here. Okay, and then if for the quantitative easing is ineffective, this is when I'm going to probably do the stuff about like low marginal propensity to consume, and I would want to explain what marginal propensity to consume is. I'm going to want to explain why it's likely to be low, right? Because consumers have probably eaten through their savings already, because consumers are uncertain about their sort of job stability, even if they are employed. Like they might have lost their job, but even if they have their job, they're nervous about losing their job. So you're likely to save far more of your income, so you've got a low marginal propensity to consume. And I would say, which means that the money provided through QE might increase incomes, but this may not translate to increases in consumption. Right, so that's one of my concerns. I think the other thing I'd probably point out here is, like, similar to marginal propensity to consume with consumers, we also are hoping that banks are actually going to increase their spending. But I might say in severe recessions, banks may choose to hold on to the cash provided by the government through QE because of their deep uncertainty about the economy. And I, again, if you really want to be sort of developed in the analysis you're providing here, I might say, again, with reference to what we have up here, there's a good chance that inflation is very low, if there even is inflation. And what that means is there's less pressure on banks to be making a return from that cash because the cash isn't losing value through inflation. So that context makes, again, this like, maybe you're not actually going to get that much increase in, let's say, the active money supply, in the velocity of money, which might be one of the things that I define here. Basically, the number of transactions that are actually taking place in the economy. It's one thing to increase the money supply, but are people actually like spending with that money? Are they investing with that money? I don't know. I might draw another like diagram and just show aggregate demand not moving as much. I feel like if we've done the Keynesian one as well already, I feel like we're kind of okay for diagrams here. My application would be like C low interest rate target. Okay, so evaluation, again, we've already done kind of the pro and con stuff. So I'm going to have to be creative with, if I want to add another evaluation at the end, which I prefer to do to get really high marks. I'm going to want to get quite creative with this. And what I'm thinking about doing here is we're going to have like different kinds of marginal propensity to consume in different European countries. So different European EU countries may have different levels of recession, and therefore QE might be more effective in some countries than others. And my example here would be like a more economically healthy, let's say, country like Germany, and I might specifically reference they've got sort of lower public debt levels, generally like higher output than other European countries, may have a higher marginal propensity to consume than countries that are still recovering from the 2010 debt crisis. We're getting all the application points, right? So like Greece, Spain, Italy, etc., Portugal, Ireland. So again, like this is really high level in terms of introducing your knowledge. But I think this is an interesting point to make if you can sort of think of something like this. We've already done a lot of evaluation because we've done the pro and the cons. This is definitely not necessary, but I think you're showing off quite a high level of knowledge if you're able to say stuff like this. And you've watched the video, so now you are prepared with this information if you want to provide it, right? But basically one of the big challenges the European Union has is because there's one currency across, I don't know how many member states there are, but across all of the member states, you might have a monetary policy that works very well for one country and doesn't work quite as well for the other countries. So this is an interesting evaluation if you end up talking about the EU. And then I think probably at the end my judgment would be, while QE may not be having the desired effect, significant economic growth, it is likely that the economy would be even lower in terms of AD if this policy was not pursued. Naturally, we would expect QE to be more effective in some European states than others. This cannot be avoided given the shared currency. Okay, so I mean that's sort of something you could say for judgment. Stuff I haven't included that like you could also add might be stuff like the risk of deflation, maybe if you hadn't done quantitative easing, or because we don't have economic growth, but it's possible, like, it's kind of what I'm hinting at here with the judgment is like, if aggregate demand had continued to fall even further, you could have experienced deflation, and then you get into maybe a deflationary cycle where consumers expect prices to fall, aggregate demand keeps falling, wages potentially fall, and so you get this really vicious cycle in the economy. Maybe we haven't been able to secure economic growth, but we've been able to prevent deflation as a result of QE. right? So that might be also a good discussion.